welcome to everybody. So this is our latest Constructing Excellence Cambridge and Oxford Corridor webinar. I've been left to host the whole thing today. I was hoping that one of the other committee members might be here to save me from doing everything, but you're stuck with me. So I'm going to do the introductions, and then at the end I'll do all the parish notices and the usual bits and pieces. Luckily, I've managed to rope in my colleague Annie, who's going to put up some links and polls on the screen as we go through the session. So we're talking about the circular economy. We've got three brilliant speakers, for which I'm very grateful. They've put a lot of effort into preparing for this. So, and hopefully, if they're happy with it, we'll put this onto the YouTube channel afterwards for anyone that can't make it today. So we've got Nicola Carniato. Nicola is an engineer at AKT with extensive experience working in civil and structural engineering. He obtained his MSc with a focus on materials engineering from a university in Italy, which I will not try and pronounce because it's very long and very Italian by name. He's been with AKT for around 15 years and regularly lectures on the circular economy. So thank you to Nicola for joining us. We also have Margherita Cesca, who many of you will also know from the Constructing Excellence group. Margherita's an Italo-British chartered architect, qualified both in Italy and the UK. Something that stands out particularly on Margherita's LinkedIn profile is that she's very proud of her Italian heritage and the passion for design that comes with that. And her work has also been singled out for praise by the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge. So we're in esteemed company indeed today. So Margherita also has an interest in the use of technology in the built environment and has been with Saunders Boston now for around 3 years. And Martin is last but certainly not least, Martin Long is a project manager who cut his teeth at Arup many years ago. He has experience on projects of all sizes throughout the east and the southeast of England. And in 2013, he established Ashfold, which now provides project management services to employers on a range of commercial projects. So we've got a nice range of architect, project manager and engineer today. We're going to take a look at those three different perspectives on the circular economy. So without further ado, I will hand over to Nicola, who I think we're going to start off with a little sort of 10-15 minute presentation from Nicola, looking at the circular economy, and then we'll come back for a panel discussion with the other speakers. So Nicola, go ahead.
Here we are. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to join this session today. Before the event started, we were wondering about the mood of the people after this lockdown. Actually, I think the mood is quite positive because we start looking beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. However, there is another crisis which we need to address, which is the climate crisis, and this one is going to be also an opportunity for UK economy to recover and reconstruct. And thanks to, in a way, to the pandemic, in 2020, we saw a temporary drop in emission as a result of COVID-19 of something like between 5 and 10% compared to 2019. But this was the result of a crisis. But to get on a long-term path to limit warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as we committed to, we need a structural transformation that achieves global emission reduction of this case every year, not only because of the crisis, and also through a well-managed transition that protects livelihoods and builds a resilient, healthy, and prosperous zero-carbon economy. There are other positive aspects here. We're going to have the COP26 soon. There's going to be also the 2021 United Nations Climate Change Conference, which all of that gives a reason for renewed optimism. UK and EU are both committed to achieving net zero by 2050. And lately, even South Korea and Japan have recently committed to the same target. And even China, which is the largest emitter, has committed to this target by 2060. UK were the first country in G7 committed to net zero. However, we know we all belong to a sector, the built environment sector, which is quite bad in this for carbon emission. Is responsible for nearly half of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and also remains quite inefficient in this sense. But on the other side, is also ready for a new change. There is actually the opportunity for the built environment professional to work together to reduce carbon in new buildings and existing stocks. This target net zero actually is 2050, but for new building is targeted to be 2030. And to reiterate this position of UK, last week, budget 2020, the government committed to developing with local partners a special framework for the Oxford-Cambridge Arc. And the opportunities, this is a big opportunity for support a sustainable, long sustainable economic growth, help to make the area a brilliant place to live, work and travel, and also support lasting improvement to the environment, green infrastructure and biodiversity, which is something also my witness to my statement to this to our Planet Earth book from David Attenborough says, as you can see here, the biodiversity has dropped, the percentage of biodiversity has dropped quite significantly throughout the years from 1930 to where we are now, by almost half of that. And in the same span of time, even the carbon emission in the atmosphere double up. But despite all this negative, the global structure of raw materials is still growing and is still having a tragic effect on biodiversity. In addition to that, embodied carbon, which arises from producing, procuring, and installing the material and components, represent almost 50% of the global of the total emission of the buildings. On top of that, also the construction and demolition industry only, as you can see in this graph, are able to recycle only nearly 30% of the materials, while the other 70% is all wasted. We are not able to recycle. So we are, the building sector is a big waster in this sense. And this is why the circular economy, which produce zero waste by reusing or recycling waste into new products, is going to be critical to this economic growth, first of all, and it's going to be also a key component of more resilient and livable spaces. The circular economy is only a part of an holistic approach, an holistic attitude, where cities and towns have an opportunity to boost the resilience in order to withstand a range of potential future climate and also health-related crises. In this, by thinking holistically about the buildings, infrastructure, and master planning. And in this case, the sustainable procurement is a key component of this economic growth. In this case, also supply chain is a big gamer in circular economy and sustainability growth. In example, if you think about cement, we can 20% of emission can be tackled through materials and process efficiency. In example, on cement, if we can substitute the calcination process that you can see in this diagram with other replacement. Currently, we use a lot of GGBS. So we can abate the emission by something like 20%. Other things is with the steel, in example, we can again reduce the carbon emission by the switching by instead of producing steel through blast furnace, as currently is done in UK, we can switch to electric arc furnace. And then there are other example, other aspect of a production, fabrication, installation, which we can take with us to reduce the carbon emission. An example, by switching a low carbon transportation. And also, the last but not the least is also trying to utilize these new technologies which account for the carbon capture and utilization and storage of what is called CCUS. In this case, also the progress in technologies and especially information technologies is going to help us a lot in this sustainable growth. We are actually, from this diagram, we can see we are now in the fourth age, which is the age of digitalization. And the advancing technologies, such as digital platform, are going to enable circular economy principle to be applied on a larger scale by improving access to information, management of materials, tracking and logistics, transparency, and facilitating also the deployment of innovative circular solution. And this is going to be a big support for small and medium-sized enterprises, which UK economy is made of mainly. And especially there is an aspect that is called trade tech, which is going to support UK economy and business enterprises by managing the data and by also having transparency in the data and the supply chain. And trade tech is going to play a vital part of implementation of ambitious corporate climate action. That's it. I will stop sharing now.
Great stuff. Okay, thank you very much. Okay, that was really interesting. I particularly enjoyed the graphics for the linear versus the circular economy, which I thought were particularly nice. So thanks very much for that, Nicola. So I'm going to move on to the panel discussion and have a little chat now, looking at sort of some of the issues around the economy and the circular economy more generally. Martin, if we can come to you first, what sort of challenges do you face as a project manager in bringing issues outlined by Nicola and issues generally in the circular economy to the top table? What is the response of clients on being on projects that you've been involved with?
Well, I think I'd start by saying all of the issues that Nicola's just alluded to have gone up the agenda, probably moreover as a result of COVID during the year past. People like Bill Gates very much in the press at the moment about saying that climate change is the next big issue for the world to conquer. And I think the fact that the world is beginning to conquer COVID is very reassuring, but it does make one at a personal level, I think, worry more about climate change and realise the enormity of what climate change needs to have happen. And very interesting that Nicola's highlighted things like cement, you know, and material, concrete, that we all probably on this webinar take for granted in our daily lives, is something that we've probably got to become much less reliant on and find ways of minimising its use, which is a very simple thing to say, but quite hard to enforce. So I think the challenges that this whole debate raises for clients is very much still in the too difficult box. Whilst at a personal level, everybody has family or children that want to make them think emotionally about the future. The challenges, I suppose, tend to be about the bottom line. And I've been through that now on 2 or 3 commercial developments where people have said, yes, I want to make a big difference. But when you come back with studies or the ways in which either embedded energy or operational energy can be reduced, it comes at a price. And that price is still very much about a commercial arrangement that we're not shaping up to. I think the benchmarks that are being introduced, which I've seen become more apparent in the last year to 6 months to a year, are that the investment community care more about governance issues, environmental issues, societal type issues. And so there are new benchmarks appearing. But that's very much from the investment community. The development community is still trying to make out that it's important, for sure it's important, but do they actually want to engage with it? Because it's a massive topic. It can take over the whole project if you're not careful. And obviously people don't want to necessarily see that happen. It's got to be kept as one aspect of a project that the development teams have to balance against all the other design issues, accessibility issues, all those other things that are fairly complicated as they stand anyways.
Yeah, and something I will just do as well is I think there's some part, there we go, that's what I was just about to say, is what people's views are on climate change and the circular economy. So it'd be quite interesting if we can get some, Annie's just brought up a poll on the screen, if we can get some views from the people in the audience as to what your organisations are doing at the moment. And there'll be a few of these going through the session. We can get a feel for what people think. Margherita, while people are voting on that, what about the designer's perspective? Do you find the challenges are similar? How do you tackle the challenge for you guys in terms of reticence over cost issues? And if you've got any examples that you can share with us of what you've done and achieved.
Yeah, I echo what Martin just said. I think it's a balancing act. It's not one answer fits all. You sort of need to consider the wider, constraints of the site, the budget, the client. Is everyone prepared to implement circular economy sustainability? Is there a budget for it? So there's a lot of how flexible is the design to accommodate, a different approach, because obviously it's not always an option because of different reasons. So what I've done, I'll share my screen. Can everyone see?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a school, is a small extension in a primary school in Greater London, London Borough of Barking and Dagenham. To be honest, originally the scheme was a little bit slightly boring, slightly seen before type of extension. So nothing exciting about the whole project. And it was kind of draining along in time, but because of other reasons. The area is quite deprived. I have to say, it's really an extremely sad area, and I always feel very sorry for the kids when I visit site. It's really depressing in short terms. So at some point back in October, I got slightly frustrated, and I said, what can we do to enhance this project, to make it better? And I thought, well, because it's small and it's a tiny extension and it's detached from the school, maybe this could be a case study and an experimental exercise to see how far we can go with sustainability and circular economy within budget. So the budget that we've got for this full classroom extension is £2 million, so it's quite small. The block is kind of an extension to an infant and a junior school that got amalgamated recently. So we have to create some sort of link between the two schools. That comes with all sorts of planning and levels issues, etc. But that doesn't matter. So the idea is to bring in something that links the two schools and the site naturally. So the nature kind of played a big part into the whole process. The building slightly sit into the level, so it's slightly sunk in, and that also helps with our mass. So then we started to dig deeper and see what we could do within budget. So we actually reduced the footprint to start with, because otherwise we would have had to go for BREEAM, and that would have been extra cost. So we said, what if we reduce the size, we keep it below 500 square meters, so we don't have to spend money on BREEAM, we actually invest the money on the actual building, and that's what we've done. So the building is way more efficient. The other thing we kept in mind, obviously because it's a school, maintenance is top priority, so we have to keep everything extremely low maintenance and as durable as possible, and that fits in with the circular economy sort of principles. So we've been looking for materials that are durable, that doesn't take any maintenance. So for example, the brick plinth, that is obviously extremely durable. It could be eventually reused if you wanted to, demolish and rebuild. But that's not the purpose of this project. We want to design buildings that last for a lot longer than 30 years. And and it's unlikely that this building would take a different use, although it's quite adaptable because it's big spans, big spaces. But nevertheless, we want to make sure the building is designed to last for long. So that, like, for example, the bricks are actually made, actually, let me scroll through. I started the wrong way around. Anyway, I want to talk about finishes first. And anyway, so I'll skip to that. So we looked at bricks that are made locally, and to make those bricks particularly, they use renewable source of energy. So that fits in with the whole idea. The other thing we specify in fiber cement, which again, they last I think 60 plus years. They really don't they don't require any maintenance. So it's that durability. That's what we wanted to make sure that was there. In terms of structure, we're going for timber. So one of the other things that we're trying to do is to follow the passive house principles and trying to build a building that is thermally efficient, extremely thermally efficient. And in addition to that, we actually are not going to have a boiler for this specific room extension, but we are feeding off the bigger boiler, which is in the junior school, creating a sort of district heating system in a way, and we are going to actually monitor how much gas we're actually going to use for this building. So that's why it's going to be a little bit of a case study. So in a year's time, we can go back and check, actually, we didn't need any gas at all, or very little, or we can check the peaks, and we can next time design better. So it's a little bit of a learning curve for us as well. So in terms of going back to the structure, we're going for timber structure, and trying to follow the passive house principle. Is going to be extremely well insulated. If we can afford it, we would like to go for ship insulation. And again, going back to the point that Martin said, is a balancing act, because we got a small budget and we need to make sure that everything fits within the £2 million. And for example, we reduced the amount of glazing because we obviously thermal model the building, and we managed to reduce the glazing, which meant we can now afford triple glaze, which is quite amazing. It's going to be aluminium windows because we are building for durability. So we don't want plastic, of course, and we want the windows to last for a long time with low maintenance. And I think the biggest and more tactile improvement, if you want, in terms of circular economy is actually in the finishes, because they're leading. I think flooring, in terms of industry, I think the leaders for in terms of using natural materials and recycled materials, they're really leading the market. So, for example, instead of going for the traditional, normally in school you find vinyl, which is not the best material in terms of sustainability. I've replaced that with linoleum, which is made is 94% natural raw material. So if you see the last images, and actually I got it here, it looks like a recipe book a little bit. So it's all absolutely natural material. So it's linseed, cork flour, wood flour, and that could potentially go back to nature if the building would get dismantled. So that's the kind of principle. The other, obviously, we're going to have carpet, because that's part of the brief. And again, the backing of the carpet is made out of recycled materials again. So it's trying to think of changes where changes can happen easily, and they're not going to break the budget. And there are plenty of options out there. And obviously, those are small changes. I appreciate they're not massive, it's not going to have a massive impact. But for example, with this building, we're saving 500 liters of oil, for example, just by specifying something slightly different. And of course, because as I said before, this is an extremely deprived area, I feel that with this building, we're giving the kids hope, which is sometimes what they need to sort of distract themselves from other issues that they have to deal with.
It's really interesting. I'm fascinated by the the concept of the linoleum, because I mean, from what I always think of linoleum as being something that people used in the old days, and it's interesting that we, you know, some of these things are coming back, and there's that sort of, you know, using timber, using materials that perhaps have supposedly gone out of fashion.
And again, look, there's the amount of finishes and colors that you can get with linoleum is, you know, it's no excuse really why we shouldn't go for something that is, and this is actually certified cradle to cradle, so it's top notch material.
And so talking about the top notch stuff, what's the, and we had a little joke about it yesterday, but what is the risk of things like that being value engineered out by, dare to say, quantity surveyors or the people that value engineer things out of projects? How do you avoid it happening, and how do you ensure that the good stuff stays in?
I think what I do, I'm very frank and honest from the very beginning, and I try and share my objective and ambitions early on, so it doesn't come as a surprise. And together with the team, we're trying to keep those elements in as far as we can. So it's flexibility. And to be honest, I have to say, this is not just thanks to me, it's thanks to the entire team, especially the QS, because together we've been looking at how can we fit those bits and pieces in. We might not be able to go for ship installation, but I accept that because we made compromises elsewhere, and we actually got, so it's working together, and it's open dialogue, and also a client who trusts us as well with what we're doing, what we're trying to do.
Interesting. Yeah, and as I say, collaboration is the new thing, isn't it? It's nice to hear that it is actually happening. So Nicola, if I can come to you now, one of the things that, and sorry, just to pick up on that poll that we just ran, that it's interesting to see that there's, there is a good majority of people who have some sort of strategy in place in their organisations, although it's interesting also to see that, I guess if you add them up, there's 45% of people who are either ambivalent or don't have anything in place at all. So that's quite an interesting thing to see. So Nicola, in terms of how you get people to implement this stuff and get people to do things, obviously there's the enthusiasm of people, architects like Margherita, who are obviously very keen to get this stuff happening, but what legislative places are there in place, and is there anything that we can take from the latest document that came out recently from the ARC on in terms of driving the changes that we need? And there's another little poll up there for people to participate in if you can.
Yeah, but there are some guidance out there. So first of all, the commitment to net zero by 2030 is in place. And this is a law, so we need to follow that one. We're going to follow that. There have been some guidances around. One was issued by the Royal Institute of Architecture, RIVA, with the targets for 2020, I think 2025, 2030, also in accordance with different types of buildings. There is also another guidance which has been done by LETI, which is a London Energy Transformation Initiative. And they give, again, guidances how to tackle that. Obviously, we're not going to, for projects which are going to be built in the next 2 years, we're not going to be net zero, but we are gradually moving to net zero. So there is another guidance about these targets in terms of equivalent carbon emissions issued by the Mayor of London. And one of the last guidance is about circular economy, how to achieve that one. And one thing I was discussing yesterday with Margherita, this one, and she picked up before when she was talking. A circular economy is not only thinking about recycled material or reused material, especially for us when we design buildings, we also have create a longevity, resilience in buildings or infrastructure. So thinking about the future and thinking about to adapt, to have some adaptability in the design, so it can last longer, because we know that embodied carbons, which are the carbon, which is the carbon quantity for materials, for production materials, is quite intense in terms of emission, but also in terms of energy. And we need to limit this one. The first thing is design for long span or buildings or infrastructure.
I think it's interesting that how much of a role education plays in some of this, because I think these are areas where we're touching on things that have an interface with digital design or low energy. But in terms of circular economy, I think the way in which the industry is responding is still relatively slow, whilst designers are at the forefront, as one would possibly expect. I think the supply chain for the circular economy, in terms of what can be recycled, what can be reused, in terms of what Margherita's identified products, there has been fit out recycling going on for quite some time in terms of furniture, finishes. I think fundamentally designing buildings now so that they can be recycled in the future, so that frames are put up that are bolted together, not welded, different materials aren't combined. That technology has been in existence now. I can remember working on research projects probably over 10 years ago, but I think it's still very slow to see real change with new buildings that are responding to that are possibly adopting more modular approaches. But equally, our industry partners in terms of supply chain, whether it's contractors, subcontractors or suppliers, I'm not sure that change is coming. And I think some of that is because the legislative things like the building regs, which are actually ultimately what we have to follow, are not keeping pace. They're not actually in a position to encourage this type or make it necessary. I mean, there's a carrot and a stick, isn't there? You've got to use the stick on occasions with these new things. People won't do it until it becomes law that you have to. And I think that's where we're probably lagging other parts of Europe. I think other economies, particularly places like Scandinavia, are probably making it the norm sooner than we will.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it, that poll? I mean, obviously the group of us that are here today that are looking at this are probably people who are already engaged with the process, but the overwhelming majority of us on this call today, looking at that poll, feel that the government should certainly be regulating to enforce the economy, the circular economy, and making sure that is driven not only by people being enthusiastic and education and everything else, but also by legislation. So just a final few questions. One thing we were talking about yesterday when we were planning this was looking at the dreaded Brexit. And obviously we've got people from all over Europe on the call today. So Margherita and Nicola, it's something that's been discussed a lot over the last 5 years is Brexit. Do we think Brexit is going to have a positive or negative effect, or any effect at all on the challenges that we face in terms of sustainability in the circular economy?
Well, I can go with this one. Brexit, I think Brexit could become a bit of an opportunity, because linking back to what Martin said, it is a slow process. Embracing, for example, circular economy and sustainable processes, it is a slower process. And to redivert your supply chain, you need to rewrite your business plan. And possibly now is the opportunity for businesses, because they have to rethink anyway because of Brexit. Maybe it's the opportunity to actually rethink about sustainability and different ways of sourcing materials and obviously looking more locally. So I think it is a massive opportunity at this stage to do it. And because we all had experience of COVID, things has changed as well in that other. So I think business plans need to be rewritten quite soon, and all those things would have to be considered particularly, and with or without the government. And the problem is, no, I think it's actually an opportunity, it's not a problem. If from a business perspective, you want to do it because otherwise someone else would do it, because obviously that's the future anyway. So you want to change fast and look at alternatives in as soon as possible, really.
Yeah, and Martin, what's your view? Do you think there's going to be opportunity improvements as a result of Brexit, or do you think it's going to cause
I
chaos?
think it's early days. We spent a lot of time agonising over what Brexit would or wouldn't mean. I think we're only a month and a half, 2 months in. I'm seeing it having some impact on sourcing of materials from Europe and design teams. I'm encouraging design teams to say, think British, but then large parts of UK manufacturing and things like cladding doesn't really have enough capacity to do larger buildings. So we're always going to be buying cladding, I think, from Germany or France or Spain or wherever. So I'm not sure that Brexit will make that much difference to that. I think where it will make a difference is in terms of personnel. So operatives that are coming from around the European Union to do installation work. I think we'll see a reduction in those characters being available for work in London, although London is still going to be a very attractive market with well-paid people, whether they come from UK or Europe. And the other thing I think is for the likes of Margherita and Nicola, working for larger organisations who rely quite significantly on labour, not only from around across Europe, but probably worldwide, attracted by the types of designs and types of buildings that are being produced here. And I think some of those people will find it harder to come to the UK now. I know Margherita was sharing when we were prepping for this, how relatively easy it was for her to come to the UK some 10, 12 years ago. The equivalent person is probably going to find it much harder to come to London now, and may decide that they'll find the US as their destination, or China, or somewhere else. So I think there will be a little bit of a brain drain potentially as a result of Brexit.
Good. Okay. Nicola, did you have anything to add on top of those opinions, or have we covered that all?
I think only to look at the sustainability, carbon emissions, circular economy. It's going to be a problem with the supply chain, especially in example, if you look at a steel production, the British steel is much more carbon hungry than the European one. So if we're going to go for a net zero building example, it seems like we are, as a designer, we tend to go for a European product. So this is an opportunity for the steel industry in UK to game up to the European standard. Another one is timber as well. Now there are studies to employ British wood rather than using timber from Austria and Slovenia, which is all good for carbon emission, but it's going to take quite a while in terms of supply chain and then train people. But maybe, in a way, maybe we're going to see Brexit could be an opportunity to go back to pre-1980. And so having also a sector of fabrication which is lacking behind them without the European reality.
It does sound like there are certainly some opportunities out there. And one of the nice things that I remember with the Olympics, quite a few of my friends were involved in the construction of the Olympic Park. And all of the materials for that were sourced from either locally or from the UK, certainly. And there was a load of, a lot of the stuff was timber that was sourced from timber suppliers up in the north, near to where my mum and dad live. And they were very excited about all of that sort of stuff. So there are certainly I would have thought, some opportunities to be had there. So this is the final question. So we've got the view of the audience just running through now. But what do we feel COVID has done in terms of the circular economy? Has it had a positive impact? I guess, Margherita, let's start with you, seeing as you were the first in last time. Let's go back to you again.
Well, I think COVID, there's a lot of negative, obviously, but on the positive, I think it gave us time to think and consider our habits and what was necessary, what was not necessary. Because if you ask me, would you go back to the pre-COVID madness of going everywhere, being everywhere, catching planes and all this mental stress that was going? No, thanks. I much prefer a calmer. So I'm looking forward to something a little bit more balanced. And I think obviously climate change comes into it. So we don't need to drive to the office every day, because now we can work from home, and this is an obvious one. You can change your habit. We got somehow more time possibly, so you can cycle to. I've been cycling to work. I mean, I've been going to the office over the last year, and I've driven twice, and that was it. I got myself a new bike because they stole my old Italian bike, so I got myself a new bike. I became vegan, me personally, last year, because I had time to think and read and experiment with food, and to me personally, it had a positive impact overall. As Nicola said earlier, obviously there's been, because there's less cars about, there's less planes about, there's less traffic, so that's obviously got an impact, but there's more deliveries, so I don't know, is balancing again, and is adjusting to something that still hasn't finished, because we're still in the middle of it. But definitely I think there's a lot of positive and I think because it's giving us time to think.
Nicola, do you have anything to add on that at all?
Yeah, basically people now are not, I think that people generally they don't want to go back to the lives we were used to live before Brexit, especially Brexit, before COVID, especially around London and or transportation and days of work. So people are ready for a new chapter, it looks like. Early this week, I was attending another conference about construction in Cambridge, and attention focus is mainly put on biodiversity, possibly because people had the time to think about that one, think about what is going to be the next chapter. People are getting ready to a new chapter. I think we are waiting for the 21st of June when we're going to start a new life. So we are now ready to try something new. And there is also, and I face this one in my office, we are 350 people. The average age is 34. So all the new generation are they don't want to be handed the old habit of working or going to the office, but also the old way of constructing. We are ready for new technologies and mainly focus on climate change, but also on health issues and resilience. So I think I hope it's going to be, I'm optimistic by nature, but it's going to be a positive chapter through embracing nature.
I certainly, you see certain improvements already, and there is this enthusiasm for cycling. Interestingly, the poll has just come up on the screen, and the 40%, the majority, think there'll be no change, and 27% say it'll slow things down. So, but yeah, I'm certainly, whenever I come to Cambridge, which I do occasionally, or I used to do before all this happened, I always feel very guilty if I try and take a car into central Cambridge, and I think that's the way things ought to be. In terms of generally active travel and all of that sort of stuff, which I've been involved in a campaign near me where we've tried to encourage people to do more active travel, as in cycling and moving around, not using a couple of tons of metal in an internal combustion engine. Martin, have you got anything to add on the end of that? I know you've been quite pleasantly surprised by the kind of the office market is still alive in London and around the region.
No, I think the office market will have to respond. I think at a personal level, I think, and I'm sure other people on this webinar will reflect, there's going to be extremes. There's going to be the optimists, and I guess I count myself in that with Nicola, where I hope that the future is better, and I hope that the ways of working will revert back to some of the old habits, mixed with some new habits, mixed with some even newer habits that we'll discover when we get back to the office or back to normality. But I think there will be a range. I think that as a project manager, I've always said through the COVID experience, I think it's even more pertinent now, different people are going to respond differently. So for me to assume that reverting back to normal will be easy is okay. But for other colleagues on projects, I've got to be mindful that people may be slightly more reluctant. They may be worried, 21st of June is a very exciting day, but for some people, it might be the first time they've even been out the house on business for over a year. Now that is bound to have an impact. If they've been hibernated in that year and gone through some fairly significant changes, what are they going to be like when they're back in the office? They're going to be quite tentative about contact, about shaking hands, about giving somebody a hug, that's going to be very counterintuitive. And I think the emotional issues that will be aligned with the physical, what we want to do, that's going to be where the area that's going to be most issues for us to deal with. But will it have an effect on the circular economy? To answer the original question, like any good politician, you don't answer the question, do you? I think it's all going to help, because I think climate change is going up the agenda. Yeah. And so circular economy and sustainability must come up the agenda, because it's our response within construction to help with climate change.
Great, thank you. We don't have any questions in the Q&A box at the moment, but if you do have any questions that you want to put to the panel before we finish, and Annie has just added in some links to some further reading that you might want to copy. That's in the chat section, so if you want to copy those out or click on them and go and have a look at some of those documents on the circular economy for a bit of extra reading, a bit of homework, that's fine. So yeah, do let us know if you've got any questions. Pop them in the next few minutes. Just one final sort of question that came up while we were planning this out is around supply chain and how you tackle the challenges faced by maybe people further down the supply chain. So perhaps all very well talking about these nice and lovely things when you're at the top of the supply chain, but have the panel got any thoughts on how to support and encourage the lower supply chain into participating in the circular economy?
If I can start speaking. Actually, I was in a talk with a major concrete contractor last week. We were talking about supply chains in concrete in the case. And so are we taking down to all the chain, first principle? There is on the starting point, there are some requirements right now, as I said before, in terms of CO2 emissions, and there is also a carbon tax that is being implemented. So clients are very aware of that one. There is also another thing that, as Martin said, the office, we're going to have an office there, but the office that are going to, the developers that are going to stand up are the developers that are going to build a good quality. And good quality is also this good quality group. There is also environmental aspect. So there is, from the beginning of the chain, there is a requirement to meet some targets. And the suppliers the contractor need to meet these targets. So we're going to talk to the supply chain. This one is not going to be always only one directional process, but it's going to be an aspect of interaction between the designer, which are located at the beginning of the process, and the suppliers, which are at the end of the process. So this one, I guess, this interaction is going to be more and more and more. This one is happening with us in the concrete, steel, and timber, but it's going to happen also in the other aspects of construction.
I guess we have a slight problem in that we're part of a world industry. So a lot of the proprietary type systems, whether it's raised flooring, ceiling tiles, they're being produced by conglomerates that work in China, Germany, US, here, and we're just one small peg. It would be nice to think that some of the changes that you've seen with, say, for instance, LED light bulbs and the like, where, you know, when they were first introduced, people didn't want to know. Now they're pretty ubiquitous, and most buildings, commercial buildings, certainly go LEDs, and even domestically, a large percentage of people are now picking up LED bulbs rather than tungsten. But it's taken quite a while for the industry to realize that they weren't going to be able to carry on selling tungsten bulbs, and so they needed to stop making them. But equally, the public were going to keep on wanting them because they knew they could buy them. So these are tough commercial decisions for suppliers to actually take. They're going to have to stop making something they've maybe been making for 15, 20, 30 years. They've got production lines, it's business as usual. But it's a brave managing director that says we're going to close that production line, but we're going to introduce a new production line with a new product, which is future-proofed for the next 20 years of legislation. And I think in that commodity market, I'm not seeing that much movement. It's very small increments. There's no massive step changes, which is, I think, what we need. We need certain key suppliers to say, you know, we're no longer going to sell single glazing. It's all going to be triple glazing. You can't get single glazing, but that isn't going to happen, is it? Quickly.
But I think we also got a responsibility, because if as designer we don't ask for it, no one's going to offer that to us. So I think we need to create that offer by demanding, and that's the basic of
it's chicken and egg, isn't it?
Yeah, it's one of those things. So the more I'm going to ask for, is that product, whatever, cradle to cradle, credit, whatever it is, then the more they're going to say, what is this? I want to be part of that, because obviously the more demand that, their market will get bigger if they can offer something that, so it's obviously they're running a business, they're not running the planet, those businesses. So they need to make sure that they make a profit, and to make a profit, they need to innovate, and that's what they have to do. But so everyone is responsible, and this is a bigger, as they call it, what was the name of it? I can't remember now, but it is a bigger problem to be solved. Sustainability is not one answer fits all, and everybody's got a responsibility, and everyone needs to drive it as far as they can with enthusiasm and a positive attitude. I think sit back and wait, I don't think is the right way forward.
That's really helpful. Thank you. So we're pretty much at the end. There's a nice comment come in, from Sushil, who said, I feel educating smaller businesses, which form the largest percentage of the industry, will be the main challenge. And that's interesting, isn't it? It's a good point that actually, so much of the industry is made up of small businesses who don't necessarily have the infrastructure in place for such radical change. And that comes up time and time again, no matter whether it's BIM or whether it's, use of new technologies or circular economy, all of these sort of things, where it comes back to the question of how do we support the smaller businesses and encourage those people to get involved in the process. So so thank you all very much. Unless you've got anything else that you want to throw in at this point, I think we'll finish up. That was a really interesting conversation. We've got some parish notices. So the next few events, thank you all for joining us today. The next few events we have in the diary, there is a networking breakfast, I think in a couple of weeks' time, which will be the usual routine. If you've not been to one of the Constructing Excellence networking breakfasts, I quite enjoy them, but then I organise them, so they're probably more enjoyable for me than perhaps for everyone else. But we break out into little rooms, have a little chat with 2 or 3 other people, and then come back into the main room with Sarah and possibly Sally, depending upon who's hosting it, for a larger conversation. But it gives you an opportunity to meet some of the other people in the group. We also have a couple more webinar type things coming up. The next one, we've got some joint ones with Constructing Excellence Oxford. They've got sessions on waterproofing and heritage significance, which sounds interesting. So you'll probably get emails about those in due course, but thank you all very much for attending. Thank you to Nicola, Margherita and to Martin for their contributions, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.